An NHL insider recently revealed that the Penguins are on the verge of a blockbuster trade. Dylan Cozens has been on the trade block for quite some time for Buffalo. Could the Penguins make a splash and acquire him with a package surrounded around Marcus Pettersson? Pettersson on the trade block for Pittsburgh, Cozens on the trade block for Buffalo, as well as other big pieces like Bowen Byram. The Penguins could change their entire season and shake up the Eastern Conference if this trade could come to fruition. We are going to break it all down on this episode of Penguins Digest. I know you guys love this trade content, so subscribe to the channel if you want more and more and more trade content, rumors, analysis surrounding your Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's go Pens, and let's keep raising that number of subscribers on Penguins Digest. We have so much to break down on this episode, specifically a huge trade involving the Penguins and the Sabres. So let's get right into it. An NHL insider links the Penguins and Sabres for a potential trade. The Buffalo Sabres may have a few players that fit exactly what Pittsburgh is looking for before the trade deadline. Let's dig a little bit deeper into this possible trade. The Sabres are in a similar situation, having failed to meet expectations and are ready to get to work on the trade market, according to Elliotte Friedman, one of the most notable guys out there for hockey news, so I trust him as a source. This could be a perfect trade. Penguins, Sabres, we just played them a couple nights ago, so I've seen these players in action recently, and I know what they bring to the table. Friedman said, one of the teams I've been wondering about a little bit is Buffalo. They have some young players. They thought about, do we move them? And I could see Dubas all over those kinds of players. That means Cozens, Byram. So I'm going to show you guys exactly what this could look like. But first, we got to get through the actual details of what Friedman said. Dubas has shown a pattern in recent trades and acquisitions that he's looking for young players who are either fresh in the NHL, on the cusp of making the NHL, or could use a change of scenery. And Dylan Cozens, Bowen Byram, both fit that exact mold. As we look at the recent additions that he's made, Beauvillier, Tomasino, Cody Glass, those are prime examples. He's going to keep trying to add young players. He's told people he's got goalies to trade, defensemen to trade, forwards to trade. And then Dylan Cozens would be the main trade piece coming over from Buffalo. He led the Sabres trade discussions. Aside from having a huge contract, he's only 23 years old. He produced 68 points in 2022-23. And we look at his numbers this year, he hasn't been that great. 22 points, a -18 rating for the Buffalo Sabres. And if you look at his past couple seasons, he's actually been really good the last 2 years. 47 points in 79 games last year, a -4 rating. And then the year before, referred to there, 68 points, -3 in 81 games. If you're a -3 or a -4 player on a really bad team, that tells you a whole lot. And being -18 this season with about half of the production, I mean, that is obviously a huge tell that Dylan Cozens might not be in the right situation right now, which means the Penguins could make a big splash to bring him in, inject some youth into this lineup, and get a 23-year-old center that's a former 7th overall pick in the draft back in 2019. Now, he's only 23 years old. He could be a big player the Penguins could go after. And Bowen Byram has also fallen short and out of favor in Buffalo, short of expectations, I might say. It could be a big swing, but the Penguins could go and get a young defenseman in Bowen Byram. The Sabres and Penguins both struggling this season. Both teams looking at the near future as far as being contenders. The Sabres win window is not what they originally had thought. They're paying a lot of money for Dylan Cozens right now, and before they have to pay Bowen Byram, just like the Penguins haven't paid Marcus Pettersson yet, they could do a swap, and they could both get the defenseman that they want. And this could be the course for a huge trade. We could see a blockbuster, like I said, shaking up the Eastern Conference if this trade would actually come to fruition. I mean, it is huge. And the Buffalo Sabres, looking at their cap number and what kind of cap space they have to make this kind of move as far as flexibility, their projected cap space around $5.2 million, but their current cap space is over $11 million. And that's with big contracts to players like Dylan Cozens that they're trying to get out from under. So Dylan Cozens, like I said, since they paid him, really hasn't met expectations, but a change of scenery, he could get back to being a 70-point player for the Penguins. I really believe that. He's got a lot of talent, all the talent in the world to be a really good player. And if he was able to come to Pittsburgh, I think that would be the change of scenery he desperately needs in order to really reach his potential with the Penguins. As we look at the actual breakdown, it took 5 minutes to get to this point, but guys, this is exactly what a trade could look like between the Penguins and the Sabres. Now, I didn't add more pieces on the Penguins side. There would be more required than what I have listed, but I just lined up the positions and I tried to make the salaries make at least a little bit of sense. Obviously, Cousins' contract would be coming over in its entirety. He's making over $7 million, but the Byram contract is one that the Sabres could eat some of that money to make a deal work, and then they know that Byram is not on their books for next season. You see what I'm saying? So they could eat some of that contract, take on Pettersson's contract in order to get that player that they want, and then not have to worry about Bowen Byram after this season when they're actually trying to spend more of their money that they have available. Penguins are kind of pressed up against the cap, so they would need the Sabres to eat some of that Byram contract in order to make it work. Like I said, they're not going to eat Cousins' contract because we're talking about a contract that extends well past this season for Cousins. And let's actually just look at that first. So Dylan Cousins is making $7.1 million a year, and he is signed for a long time, but he is a 23-year-old player. So you're talking about getting him in the prime of his career, a player that if Dubas really likes, he could make this trade. He could pull the trigger on this deal and bring in a guy like Dylan Cousins to really be that third line center for the Penguins that would move up to first or second line, a top six forward whenever, Evgeni Malkin and Sidney Crosby are gone. You're starting to build that core of players for after the big three retires right now. That's what Dubas is trying to do. Not only compete now, but build for the future. And a 23-year-old center that was a former first-round pick, if you think he has all the intangibles and the measurables to be a good player, that's the type of guy you want to go after. And Bowen Byram, same thing. I mean, if you look at their defense, they are paying Rasmus Dahlin. They are paying Owen Power. They are paying Matthias Samuelsson. They don't want to pay Bowen Byram because they have all these young defensemen. But Marcus Pettersson could bring that veteran presence where he's been in the league a little bit longer. You pay just a little bit more for him, and then you don't have as young of a team. Because they have one of the younger teams in the National Hockey League. I think they might have the youngest team in the National Hockey League, if I remember correctly. I think they have literally the youngest roster. So if they get a little bit older, that's actually a good thing. You want Marcus Pettersson? He's a veteran defenseman. He's going to do what you ask him to do. He's a solid top four defenseman that can play alongside Dahlin. He can play alongside Power. Doesn't matter wherever you want to put him. Instead of having more youth on the back end, more inexperience in Bowen Byram, who hasn't lived up to the expectations that they have for him when they traded Casey Middlestat for him. So right now for the Sabres, they're looking for a shakeup, just like the Penguins are looking for a shakeup. This trade could answer all of the questions that are out there for both of these teams. You get Cousins, you get Bowen Byram, you get rid of Pettersson, you get rid of Kevin Hayes. That's a guy I threw in there because he's a veteran, signed for another year. He's, got a semi-affordable cap hit, a little over $3 million. So you could do that. You could really make that work, whether it's draft picks or whatever you have to give up, maybe a couple other players. I don't think it would really take that much because if you talk about Pettersson for Byram, the thing that Byram has that's an advantage over Pettersson is his age. But the thing that Pettersson has over Byram is his experience and what he's put on paper as far as his production. So you're trading potential for production. So I don't think it's that big of a deal to make that kind of swap. I actually think a swap 1-for-1 wouldn't be that far off between those two guys because they're both due a contract at the end of the season. Now, Cousins is where it gets a little more complicated. The Sabres don't want his contract on their books right now. He has not been the same player, so he knows it's a change of scenery could change his career, just like the change of trajectory of the career of Pierre-Luc Dubois. That's who I think of. When he got traded, he became a different player. That's what I see in Cousins. If you trade an unhappy guy, he could become a decent player. So the Penguins trade, Kevin Hayes, maybe Beauvillier. There's another name I saw thrown away. Oh, maybe even a draft pick, whatever it takes, one prospect. But I'm not trying to trade the farm, obviously. I'm saying like one prospect or one player could be enough to sway that trade for the Sabres to do it, right? So you got Kevin Hayes, Marcus Pettersson, and then let's just say hypothetically Anthony Beauvillier. If they think that's a guy that they can sign for a cheaper value so that they can build out the rest of their roster, they're pretty decent up front. They have some pretty talented players, especially at the center position with Tage Thompson. Dylan Cousins is a second line guy for them right now. But if we look back to their graphic, they want to pay Peyton Krebs right now. Peyton Krebs is a guy that's been, decent for them, 23 years old, former first-round pick as well back in 2019. If they're going to pay Krebs, they have to get Cousins off the books. They're not going to have to pay Krebs near as much as they're paying Cousins right now. So if they trade that $7.1 million cap hit to Pittsburgh, they could pay Krebs. And the Penguins could pay Cousins. They could pay Krebs and Beauvillier the same amount that they're paying Cousins. You see what I'm saying? So it's very complicated, but it's also not complicated at the same time. This is a realistic trade that we could see formulate here between the Penguins and the Sabres, something that both teams desperately need is a shakeup right now. And if you're trading multiple pieces back and forth, those changes of sceneries can be huge. I referenced Pierre-Luc Dubois. There's been a lot of other instances in the NHL over the last few years. Players that have just not been happy where they're at, traded somewhere else, and then ended up being really really good hockey player. So if they're done with Dylan Cousins in this experiment, he's only 23 years old, but you're paying him $7.1 million a year. Penguins could get something out of that, right? You are already on the books for all this money. You're financially obligated to pay all of these players, right? But if you get Marcus Pettersson and you get Kevin Hayes off the books for the same price that you're paying those two, you get Dylan Cousins, a 23-year-old center that could be the future, right? So it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it that way. That's why I really do believe this is a trade that could happen. You talk about the production drop off for Cousins. You talk about needing a change of scenery. Marcus Pettersson, good as gone. Could the Sabres be a team to be like, hey, Marcus Pettersson's a proven commodity in the NHL. He could come in and play alongside Dali or whatever they want to do with him. And then the Penguins get a more potential-driven player with Bowen Byram, who's never really lived up to the same expectations that was held for him when he was in Colorado. He looked to be that next big thing. And then when he got traded, he hasn't been the same. So I really do think this could be a trade that's a win-win for both sides. And it makes sense when you look at it that way, right? So I'm just saying this is a possibility. If Elliotte Friedman's talking about it, then I need to talk about it. So Penguins Sabres could be swinging a big trade here in the near future. Byram and Cousins are on the block for the Sabres. And then for the Penguins, you see Marcus Pettersson. I could see them trading a guy like Kevin Hayes, Beauvillier, any other UFA that makes the deal make sense, that makes it fair, and that makes the Sabres want to make this kind of trade. So I don't see them trading any draft picks or like actual prospect capital. Maybe like one guy that's like not towards the top, but maybe the middle of the ground for their prospect pool. But they're not going to give up anything super crazy. So this trade does make a lot of sense for both sides if it was going to happen. And I just had to kind of point it out for you guys and show you what it might look like. So that is a possibility in the near future. Penguins, Sabres shaking up the Eastern Conference. Just stay tuned for that, and we will be on it as soon as it happens, if it does happen, for Penguins Digest. So thank you guys for watching this episode. Just a hypothetical trade possibility that we're throwing at you here today. If it was talked about in a podcast by one of the main insiders in the NHL, and he even had the confidence to even mention it, then it's something that we also need to mention here on Penguins Digest. I told you we're going to cover everything, whether it's something that happens or might happen or already happened. We're going to talk about it here on this channel. So thank you guys. Subscribe if you haven't already, and then drop a like on this video if you liked it, and then leave me a reply in the comment section. What do you think about this possible trade? Do you want Dylan Cousins? Do you want Bo Byram? Let's see. So thank you guys for watching. We'll see you on the next episode of Penguins Digest.